Hey all, happy December, which means it is time to wrap up November reading, and in a much more timely fashion for me than the past couple of months have been. Now, if you've been hanging out with me the last week or so, you might be saying, Melody, there is a HarperCollins strike going on. You have talked about it multiple times. What's going on? Is the strike over? No, the strike isn't over. And again, the ask from the union is that we do not make dedicated content, or that content creators, reviewers don't make dedicated content, that they hold their reviews until the resolution of the strike. This strike has not been resolved. We have seen another week come and go with HarperCollins not even entertaining the idea of conversation to the public's knowledge and purview. And I have been trying to keep up to date with the union's Twitter account. Additionally, this past week, HarperCollins social media, one of their social media accounts, posted something about like what you're cozying up to for the winter, which really just struck a chord with me because they are leaving their workers out in the cold. And if you follow my Instagram, you may see a comment I left along those lines, though not very eloquent, because I was so fired up about it. And I know that there is this kind of balance of what the company is going to be doing on the company pages, and they are clearly not even interested in acknowledging that around half of their New York office is currently out on strike, and they are definitely not interested in making that knowledge known to those who may not know it. So a long way of saying that I'm not going to be giving reviews of those books in this video, but I also do want to make it clearer what is being impacted by this. And again, the union is not asking us to stop buying HarperCollins titles at this time, but this is impacting books that I'm very passionate about, books that I have hoped to review, hope to feature, imprints that I really enjoy. For instance, as I've said before, my favorite romance imprint is Avon, which is a HarperCollins imprint, and all of this is really coloring my perception of all of these imprints, unfortunately. And I know that the authors have no say in this and are also in a really difficult place with all of this. And I know that the union doesn't want their authors to be in a difficult place. They are passionate about these books, as we all are. They are the team behind these books. They are making this success happen. And yet they are the ones not being given a living wage. They are being exploited for their passion. And as I've said before, that impacts everything. So I'm not gonna go up on my full soapbox. If you've been with me, like I said, the last week, you've heard this before, but I think it is important to keep saying. But let's talk about the books that I read this month that I can talk about, because there are still many, many of those. So the first that I read, and a good deal of these will have been featured on Feature Fridays, but was Spells for Forgetting by Adrienne Young. This, I believe, don't quote me on that though, is her first adult, and it is following a very small, isolated town that has some kind of magic and whimsy to it, but that has been tinged by this tragedy that occurred many, many years ago. And so we are following our two protagonists, Emery and August, as they kind of have to face this tragedy and also try and solve this mystery. Because when they were seniors, in love, and on the eve of their escape from this small, isolated tourist town, there was a fire and there was also a murder. Their best friend, or one of their best friends in this small kind of friend group that they had, was found in the forest, and her lungs were filled with water, though she was on dry land. And this has never been solved, but it was pinned on August, and August and his mother ended up fleeing the community, and Emery's life was kind of torn apart. Her father was also injured in this fire, and this has just been this lingering mystery. And we also watch as this community has kind of rebuilt, but as they get news that August is coming back after the death of his mother to kind of finalize things there, we also see them kind of circle the wagons, but it also opens up old wounds and old desires for both Emery and August, and things from the past start coming out of the shadows. So I was immediately intrigued by this, both from the premise, also the idea that this premise kind of starts rooted in something young adult, which is what this author is known for, but then places us more in an adult space with us and is having us look back on that. And so I was very intrigued by that kind of distance it was going to offer us narratively and how that would change the story being told. Additionally, I was also very intrigued by the idea that there was some kind of magic here. There was something extra about this small town, this island town, and the isolation there as well, which kind of helps ferment and catalyze these secrets. So there's a lot at the heart of this that is very intriguing. Unfortunately, the execution didn't really work for me. It was oddly paced in that what I thought we were going to be focusing on in terms of the mystery came much later. Like, I would think that if you want to get this like love of your life off the hook for this murder you don't believe he did, and also it was your best friend that was murdered, that there would be more interest in that there, and the interest in that seemed to come much later, the active interest, I should say. There was a lot of angst and pining here, but we didn't really get the full sense of the why of that, and there were flashbacks that attempted to establish that, but I don't think really helped illuminate the characters or build anything bigger in terms of those stakes or that emotional kind of resonance. And then additionally, the small town aspect of it, one, it didn't play in the kind of supernatural or magical element as much as I expected. And I'm not even talking like full blown, but the kind of metaphorical sense of it kind of got lost and shuffled in the angst and brooding, I would say, unfortunately. And there were also just a lot of points of view in this story. I understand going between Emery and August, but we got more than that occasionally. And as a reader, it just left me not able to kind of root myself in any one place and really understand what the focus was either. I think that it was an intriguing idea, but I don't think it ultimately paid off in the way that the author hoped in terms of the narrative. So while I didn't hate this book by any means, it was definitely very middle of the road for me. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a lot of staying power in my mind other than kind of what I was disappointed by and the kind of missed opportunities. I think I would have loved that angst and that longing and that kind of lingering of feeling and that connection if I had felt more connected to it as a reader. But instead, the characters just came off feeling kind of immature in a lot of ways. I would recommend you another book about a man coming back to his small island community as a teacher in the real world and kind of facing off with this history with someone on this island. But that book is also a HarperCollins title, so I won't be doing that, I guess. So if you like the angst and the brooding, and the atmosphere is definitely there and want it aged up a little bit, I definitely think that this might work for you. It's just a matter of, does that aging up change things significantly enough in how that lands? Like, I'm willing to go with that for teenagers in a little bit different way than for adults, especially adults that haven't interacted with each other since they were teenagers. And now I know that can linger. I absolutely understand that can linger and would be willing to buy into it, but this narrative for me personally didn't really offer me the buy-in to make it make sense. And then I read 7 Empty Houses by Samantha Schweblin and translated by Megan McDowell. This is a short story collection and has since won the National Book Award for Translated Literature for 2022, which is fantastic. I love Samantha Schweblin's work. I love Megan McDowell's work because she translates for 2 of my favorite authors in translation. So I was very intrigued by this, especially because Samantha Schweblin's books are so weird. Her narratives are so weird. And I really, really adored her last short story collection, Mouthful of Birds. I think that the weirdness of her worlds really excels in short form because then you can kind of go to those weirder places without having to make it make sense or deal with that suspension of disbelief beyond the short form, if that makes sense. So this book was dealing with this kind of interconnected concept of empty houses in different ways and what that meant. The first story opened with like this mother and daughter who would go on drives through this really wealthy neighborhood, and one day their car gets stuck and they end up in this house, even though the woman is like really wants them gone, is very disconcerted by their presence, and the mother starts like going through this house and locks herself in the bedroom. And so it kind of breaks down those mores and makes us as readers sit in that discomfort. And I would argue that a lot of the oddness of this collection involves sitting in that kind of discomfort. Some of these stories are not as on the nose about this idea of emptiness or empty houses as others. So we are also, I think, building that concept out to families as well. I don't know, it was very interesting. It was also very short. I would say that I think I enjoyed Mouthful of Birds a little bit more, but Mouthful of Birds is also a little bit more conventionally odd, if that makes sense. We are dealing with things that move outside of the realm of the possible in different ways. Things transcend a little bit more into supernatural adjacent. And here we are asked to live in kind of an oddness and a discomfort that stems more from the real world and the illusions that we build and the kind of deconstruction of those illusions. So while I really enjoyed this, and I definitely think it was deserving of the award that it received, I think that I prefer Mouthful of Birds a little bit more. But I will also say that all of her narratives, whether they be short stories or shorter novels, all are so incredibly inventive and odd and in such different ways. While there is a real cohesion of voice, which I think is also excellent translation because it is a different voice than Mariana Enriquez, even as it plays in similar realms that I inherently gravitate to, there is also something so distinct about all of these narratives and so disconcerting in different ways. She's really able to tap into things and explore things that unsettle the human spirit in some ways. And here it is exploring that on a little bit more domestic of a stage. Apologies if my voice is like odd at any points. I think I am still dealing with some nasal congestion issues stemming from being sick. So I don't know. But moving on to kind of disconcerting and domestic, let's talk about Malice House by Megan Shepherd. This is another adult title from an author who made their name in the young adult space. I was very excited for this title because it follows a young woman who goes to kind of take care of things after her father's death. Her father was a very prolific author and has a lot of notoriety around his work. Our protagonist Haven has been trying to break into illustration and kind of illustrating children's books and has been unsuccessful. And when cleaning out the attic, she discovers this unpublished manuscript from her father called Bedtime Stories for Monsters. And it also kind of mirrors some of the delusions he was having late in his life. But she is really drawn to this manuscript and decides to illustrate it. And then things start getting odd. And the people that she assumed would be allies in getting this published, because in some way she sees this as an opportunity for the start of her own career, she runs into unforeseen obstacles that she wasn't anticipating. And then the delusions that her father was having toward the end of his life, she starts to wonder if some of that may not have been all delusion, or if she is succumbing to the same delusions. What drew me to this book in terms of what compelled me from the blurb was this idea of this bleeding of this reality and this fantasy world. And we definitely got that, but I don't think the fantasy world was built out as much as I would have liked. It starts to creep in, but it doesn't really creep in a way that we as readers get to explore it organically. We're told of the kind of conventions of this world and who is who in this world and what that means, and we're given little slivers of the narratives from Bedtime Stories for Monsters at the beginning of the chapters, but we are not really allowed to discover these monsters on our own. We discover them as they come into the real world, but then we get Haven's kind of explanation of who this monster was. And I really would have liked to see those worlds bleed a little bit more, I think, especially in terms of seeing those characters and feeling the danger of those characters beyond kind of the hunt and chase without knowing the real stakes there. And maybe that's a little bit of me not really watching a lot of horror because I am a scaredy pants, but at the same time, this narrative or those moments in this narrative didn't particularly scare me because we were just kind of like running and hiding, and then we are hearing about the danger of what these monsters or creatures are capable of through Haven rather than discovering it through action and feeling those stakes a little bit more. We do get moments of it, but I would argue not enough. And also the bleeding is very much in favor of those creatures coming into our world, which is part, I think, of that lack of discovery. So we are not ever moving into their world, which I think is a very deliberate choice and says something very specific. So I'm not upset or disappointed in the choice per se, but that I think that that could have been executed a little bit more cleanly. I think that being able to explore those stories and those monsters a little bit more would have been a little bit more satisfying. But we do have a protagonist here who we can't really trust. We don't really know what is going on with her, and that I did appreciate. So I didn't dislike this book by any means. I just saw opportunities to kind of build things out and elevate it, especially because the concept of this is so good. I really enjoyed what we were playing with here, and I think that there were some opportunities, like I said, to just take it to the next level in some places. But ultimately, I did really enjoy my reading time with this, and it was that perfect kind of like fall, end of spooky season kind of read. That being said, I do read and am drawn to those kinds of things all year, so I don't know that we need to judge it just purely on that. But moving out of spooky season, so to speak, I read Everything is Okay by Debbie Tung. This was longlisted for the graphic novel Goodreads Choice Award, and I was able to get it through Hoopla. This is really looking at mental illness, particularly anxiety and depression, through art. I had moments where it felt very much like a mirror, moments where the way it discussed anxiety, I was like, oh, because I've been getting my own kind of like under control, and I was like, I'm not going to fall into some of these thought patterns now. But the art really, I enjoyed the art style. I enjoyed the way we kind of moved into color. We played with lack of color in terms of kind of where our mental health may be, but it never felt like that lack of color was like the sad part of a Zoloft commercial. It felt very true and reflective of experience. I will say that while this book did kind of follow a little bit of a memoir narrative of sorts, there was some kind of through line, it did kind of interrupt itself a lot with these kind of almost platitudes, which I can appreciate, and I understand encouragement, especially in something like this. But the way it was structured and how and where those were slipped in, it didn't feel as organic in the story part of it, I guess I should say. And so we would move through like her personal journey, and there were parts that were very personal and vulnerable. And then there were parts that felt more like advice or, like I said, platitudes. So the balance was a little odd to me. It didn't feel as cohesive as I thought it could. It wasn't bad, and I enjoyed my time with it, but I think it could have been tightened a little bit more in its structure. And while everything fit the same theme, it felt a little scattered. That being said, I did enjoy the art, especially when we got to play with color in the artwork. And some of those panels or pages were nice to just kind of sit on and appreciate. So I do appreciate that as well. That being said, I am by no means an art critic. I am but a woman with an Art Institute membership that has not been to the Art Institute since I bought my membership. So what does that really say about me? But if you struggle with anxiety and depression or have struggled, I think that this could be a kind of comforting reflection of that. If you have anyone in your life that struggles with anxiety and depression and you have trouble kind of conceptualizing that, I think that this is a really accessible way of kind of understanding what some of that internal looks like and feels like and how it may present itself on the outside. So I do think it has a lot going on and has a clear mission. I just think that there were some opportunities to kind of sand some of that out structurally. And then I read Ocean's Echo by Everina Maxwell, which I talked about recently. This takes place in the same kind of galactic universe as Winter's Orbit, last year's kind of runaway hit. And this follows two men, Tennel, who has been kind of forced into military service by his aunt, who is the commander, because he has been kind of on the run based on his reader abilities, because this world is kind of separated into architects and readers, and not everyone, but there is a select portion of the population that was genetically engineered, so to speak, in the previous generation, and architects can kind of control minds and readers can kind of read minds, though it doesn't go fully into that. I kind of wanted that to be drawn out just a little bit more. I think it was kind of portrayed a lot through action was the intent, but I wanted a little bit firmer grasp on that, especially because, as I talked about in my Feature Friday, from my perspective, it's hard to imagine someone being able to control you as lesser than someone being able to read your mind. Like, yes, both are not ideal, would prefer neither, but I wanted to understand this kind of world building that made that distinction and that decision. But Tennille is forced into the army, and the idea is they are going to sink him to an architect, kind of pair them so that Tennille is more under control. And the architect they have picked is Surratt, who is very young, a very young commander, and his family legacy has been tainted by his parent kind of being involved in a coup of sorts and kind of going out with some dishonor. And so he is attempting to kind of rectify that legacy and secure a pension for his other parent. So he comes in and realizes Tennille has not agreed to this pairing, and they agree to fake it, basically. So it is a little bit of the sci-fi version of like fake dating and marriage of convenience, but the political intrigue of this really takes center stage. And this action and this intrigue really helps us explore these characters and develop these characters through their external circumstances, especially because so much of them and the character and the circumstances of their relationship is so internal because we are dealing with the mind. So watching them kind of come together gradually and really fit into each other's life and make sense of each other in a way that others around them have never really made sense of them is really beautiful to watch. I will say that some of the political intrigue and like the action of it, sometimes I personally got a little lost in, but I'm not always great at visualizing action sequences, so that could also just be on me, but I definitely understand why that was built out to complement the internal. We had a nice balance of the external and the internal, and each served each other very specifically within the story. So I was very impressed because this definitely stands on its own. I caught references or things that were the same in the universe to Winter's Orbit, and while my memory isn't great, I didn't catch like really big obvious references to Winter's Orbit. So it's not like this was a direct sequel by any means. And it's not like you need to read in any particular order, I would say. So it's more just this kind of larger extended universe, which I did appreciate. And I appreciated that this felt like such a unique and strong follow-up to something that was so successful and so buzzy. This built out very full characters and circumstances that I think appeal to readers who liked the first, but are also distinct and very much their own thing. So I definitely really enjoyed it. And so to finish this up and to cheat a little bit, because I technically finished this December 1st, even though I knew the end by C.L. Polk. I just talked about this on a Feature Friday. It is a kind of Depression era supernatural noir set in Chicago with a sapphic romance at its heart. And it is a really smart book. As you can see, it is very short. And so it distills a lot into a little bit of space. We have kind of like cosmic battles. We have very internal kind of explorations of the soul and what a soul is worth and what those you love are worth. And so there's this great balance of this very like character driven and world driven with a very real and present hunt for a serial killer at its heart. But I love the way that even in such a small space, one, the relationship at the heart of this is so well drawn and so loving and so built in the little moments. It makes us very aware of the little moments being what are worth fighting for and what the soul is fighting for in many ways. As I said before on Friday, I also appreciated, like I said, that the main conflict didn't come from that relationship. Rather, that relationship was really our center and kind of our emotional core. It was our steadying point. And then the world we got to explore around it. Yes, I liked the Chicago aspects because I live in Chicago, but also the exploration, particularly of queer spaces. I loved the visuals and atmosphere it drew, especially for the speakeasy that we see early in the book. It felt so real. Just the little interactions we get going in between people, the description of the smoke kind of sitting in the air and the lighting fixtures and where the stage is and the dancing, and it all just felt very present and visceral, and I really enjoyed that. And I think that takes incredible craft, especially in something so short. That being said, while I think it was a very intentional clearly choice to be a novella and think was very successful. Like with Polk's other works, there were parts that I would have liked to see expanded on or built out a little bit more, particularly within this concept of the brotherhood that we have here, and this idea that if you've sold your soul at the crossroads, you can no longer be in the brotherhood, you're now a warlock, and what does it mean to be a warlock? There were just some magical rules that were kind of thrown out as given circumstances, and we as readers needed to roll with, that I am totally capable of doing, and I think the narrative sustains, but I would have liked to see that magical world explored just a little bit more actively, I think. That being said, I think that that was a layer that would have been there if this was a full-length novel. So yeah, altogether, not too shabby for November, especially as historically November is a month where I go into a pretty hard reading slump. So we'll see how that goes for the end of the year. Like I've said before, I am hoping to do a 12 days of reviews for December. I have potentially run into a hiccup with that in that I have a family member who is not well, and I don't know how that's gonna go. So I will do my best. I don't know if we're going to be able to look at 12 consecutive days of reviews as I hoped. I'm not sure. Let me know what you're interested in. If I can't do it all, you know, back to back to back, if you still want me to throw those up, what you're thinking, just because I don't really know where life is gonna be right now, but we'll see, and I'll definitely be reading. So if you've read any of the books that I chatted about today, I would love to hear your thoughts on them. Would also love to hear your thoughts on your reading life and what November looked like for you, what the standouts were, if there were any bummers, but yeah, just always happy to chat books. Thanks for hanging out, as always, as I chatted about what my reading life looked like this month. Read something good, like and subscribe if you feel like it, and yeah,